Kansas/Nebraska Act /Bleeding Act. The Nebraska and Kansas Act, or better known as the Bleeding Act, was one of the most interesting things that happened in the 1800s. There were massacres, shootings, and lots of government arguments. Another reason of why this act was so interesting is because it had to do with one of the most talked about conflicts in the world, the slave trade. People in the Bleeding Act. The Kansas and Nebraska Act, or Bleeding Act, was from 1845 to 1855, and including the two states, Kansas and Nebraska. This act involved many people, such as Missourians, John Brown, the anti-slavery settlers, pro-slavery settlers, and Senator Stephen A. Douglas. The election of March 1855. The election of March 1855 happened because of the Missourians traveling to the election just for a vote to be put down in order for the election to go their way. Another thing that caused the Nebraska and Kansas Act, or Bleeding Act, was the disagreement between the pro-slavery settlers and the anti-slavery settlers, arguing about whether or not slavery should be legal in the United States. About the Bleeding Act. The election of 1855 occurred about whether or not slavery should have been legal in the United States. The election of anti-slavery or pro-slavery settlers led into a violent fight, creating Bleeding Kansas. A bill was drafted to divide the territory into two territories. This separated the lands and created two territories called Nebraska and Kansas. The bill was passed to possibly get rid of the Missouri Compromise. Getting rid of the Missouri Compromise meant that slavery would have been allowed and legal in the United States. The Potawatomi Massacre occurred after John Brown killed 5 people next to a creek. News spread very fast and civil war broke out in Kansas, calling it once again Bleeding Kansas. How did this event cause change? The Kansas and Nebraska Act, or Bleeding Act, caused change because if the 5,000 Missourians hadn't have traveled to the election of 1855, then it wouldn't have been a failure to the pro-slavery settlers, and slavery would not have occurred as much in the United States as it did in the 1800s.